Have you ever felt like giving up quietly? Like the world wouldn't even notice if you disappeared? There are moments when the silence becomes too loud, when the weight we carry inside drowns out every reason to keep going. This story isn't just about pain. It's about how sometimes, right at the edge, God whispers just loud enough to save us. Maybe you're watching this because you're trying to hold on. Or maybe you've already let go. But what if, just like Isabel, someone knocked on your window in the darkest moment and reminded you that heaven never forgets your name? For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. Jeremiah 29:11. Before we begin, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been in a place so dark you thought God had stopped looking for you? If this story reminds you of something you've lived or someone you know, tell us in the comments. Someone out there might need to read it. And if you're new here, subscribe to our channel and stay with us until the very last word. You'll understand why Isabel's life didn't end on that road. It was just beginning. The rain had just started when Isabel closed the door behind her. Not a word to anyone, not even a note left on the table. The apartment smelled of stale coffee and unopened mail, shadows cast long across the floor by a single flickering lamp. She took a slow breath, the kind you take when you're trying to hold it all in, when your chest burns but the tears won't come. The silence around her wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating, full of things she had no strength to say anymore. Her phone vibrated once. She looked at the screen. Unknown number. She let it die in her hand. No one really called anymore. Not unless they wanted something. Not unless they were about to hurt her again. Isabel had always been the one who held everyone else together. The friend who showed up. The daughter who tried to be enough. The woman who loved with everything she had. Even when all she got back was coldness. But lately something inside had started to slip, quietly, like water through her fingers. It wasn't a single moment that broke her. It was thousands, the canceled plans, the messages left on read, the way people stopped looking her in the eyes. Her reflection in the mirror had changed. The light was gone. Her voice had become too soft to be heard. And now she wasn't even sure if she was still in there somewhere, or if life had already passed through her. She packed a small bag, not out of fear, but with precision, like someone who had already made peace with the idea of leaving. Her journal, a sweater, 3 letters. The first was for her mother, even though they hadn't spoken in months. The second for a friend who'd once said, "If you ever disappear, I'll know something's wrong." The third was for no one in particular. It started with, "To whoever finds me." She didn't plan a destination, only a direction, a way. The engine started, the car lights cutting through the early evening fog. She drove through the city as if watching someone else's life from the window. Every red light felt like a question. "Are you sure?" But Isabel didn't flinch. She had stopped waiting for someone to ask her if she was okay. The buildings got smaller. The noise faded. Now only the hum of the road. The silence she carried followed her, tighter than a seatbelt, louder than the music she didn't play. There was no playlist tonight, just breath and thought. She had rehearsed it in her mind, not the end, but the goodbye. How she would leave nothing behind that asked for rescue. How her story would slip away unnoticed, like a forgotten tune. And yet, something inside her hadn't turned off completely. A flicker, a question. Will they wonder? Not, will they care? She had given up on that. But maybe, somewhere, someone would pause, even just for a second. Night settled over the road like a soft blanket. The sky was cloudy, no stars to guide her. Her fingers gripped the steering wheel tighter as the rain picked up. She passed towns she didn't know the names of. Gas stations with broken neon lights, billboards promising things she no longer believed in. Everything looked like a movie she no longer wanted to be part of, and yet she kept driving. like her life was waiting somewhere past mile marker 93. At one point, the car's headlights caught a sign. Next rest stop, 8 miles. Her heart flickered, not in hope, but in awareness. She was running low, not on fuel, but on will. The moment was coming, the one she had feared and planned in equal measure. She looked at her rearview mirror and whispered, "I'm sorry." To whom? She wasn't sure. Maybe herself. And then came the fog, thick, blinding. A sudden veil across the road. She slowed the car, her pulse quickening. Even the silence inside her grew louder, as if the air knew what she was about to do. She pulled over just past a row of pine. The rest stop wasn't really a stop, just an open patch of gravel and a bench missing one leg. A dim streetlight buzzed overhead, flickering like it was breathing its last. Isabel turned off the engine and sat in the stillness, listening to the ticking of the motor cooling down. The rain softened, but the fog remained, a thick curtain hiding whatever came next. She opened the glove compartment and took out the 3 letters. They were sealed, names written in shaky handwriting. Her fingers trembled as she traced the edges of each envelope. Why was it so much easier to write to people than to ask them to listen while she was still alive? The letter to her mother was the hardest to let go of. It started with, "I forgive you," but forgiveness felt like a lie when the wound still bled. There were birthdays skipped, calls unanswered, and words that could never be unsaid. Isabel had memorized the silence of that relationship. It was sharp, not soft, heavy, not healing, but even in that pain, part of her still longed to be held, like a child lost at the supermarket, pretending she's brave until her mother calls her name. But that call had never come, not once. The second letter was for Julia, her best friend since high school. They had promised never to drift apart, but life had other plans. Messages turned into one-word replies, calls into voicemail. The last time they saw each other, Isabel had smiled like everything was fine. She had even said, "I'm good, just busy," and Julia had believed her. No one ever suspects the girl who still shows up with a smile, not even her. The third letter was anonymous, written for whoever might find her, buried in the glove box or on the passenger seat. It told the truth, raw and unfiltered. How she had loved deeply but never felt chosen. How she gave everything but always felt disposable. How the world seemed to applaud strength while ignoring invisible fractures. There was a line near the end that read, "If I vanish, tell them I was real." She wasn't asking to be remembered, just not to be erased. The sky began to clear slightly, and Isabel stepped out of the car. The air was damp, the gravel crunching beneath her boots. She stood by the bench, holding the letters like artifacts from a life she no longer recognized. The wind brushed her cheeks like a whisper, but it wasn't comforting. It felt like time was pressing forward, urging her to decide. One more breath, one more step, and then nothing, or maybe everything. But she couldn't yet tell the difference. She walked a few feet from the car and looked around. No signs of life, just the hum of the streetlight and the hush of distant trees. She felt like a ghost in her own body, present but unanchored, the kind of sadness that isn't loud but endless. She clutched the letters to her chest and closed her eyes, not to pray. She didn't know how anymore, but maybe just to listen to whatever voice remained, if there was one. And then came a sound, soft, barely a knock, not from the outside, but from memory. A memory of being 9 years old, lost at a church camp, sitting alone in the woods crying until someone found her. A counselor knelt and whispered, "You are never truly alone, sweetheart." That moment had faded, until now. Why did that voice echo now in the middle of a foggy highway? Why did it make her hesitate? She didn't know, but she did. She sat back in the driver's seat, letters still in hand. The engine remained off. Her heart beat loud in her ears. She looked in the rear-view mirror again, this time not to apologize, but to search for a sign, for a flicker, for anything. And then headlights appeared in the distance, slow, approaching, not fast enough to pass by, but just slow enough to stop, and someone stepped out. The footsteps echoed faintly on the wet gravel, each one slow and deliberate. Isabel didn't move. Her breath caught in her chest as the silhouette emerged from the fog, tall, unfamiliar, carrying something in one hand. It wasn't a weapon. It looked like a thermos. The figure paused near her window and tapped gently, just once. She hesitated, frozen in the half-light of uncertainty. Was this a trap? A coincidence? A test? Her hand hovered near the door lock, but her body refused to move. The silence stretched. The knock came again, soft, almost caring. Whoever it was didn't walk away. She cracked the window just an inch. Cold air rushed in, mixing with her racing pulse. The man's voice was calm, low. "Are you okay?" 3 simple words, but they cut through the noise in her head. She nodded too quickly, not convincing anyone. He didn't push. He just placed the thermos on the hood of her car and stepped back. "Didn't mean to scare you," he added. "I just saw your lights. Thought maybe you needed someone." She wanted to answer, but her throat locked. Who was this stranger with a gentle tone in the middle of nowhere? Why did his presence feel like a pause in the storm? He didn't look away. After a long minute, she stepped out, keeping her distance. The night air bit at her skin, and the fog swirled around them like smoke. He introduced himself as Caleb, a volunteer paramedic from a nearby mountain town. He had seen the car pulled over while heading home. "Didn't feel right just driving past," he said. Isabel studied his eyes. There was no threat in them, just humanity, tired humanity, the kind that recognizes pain because it carries its own. She lowered her gaze, clutching the letters tighter. "Do you always stop for broken people?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. His response was instant. "Only when I see myself in them." Those words struck deeper than she expected. She felt something shift inside, not healing, but awareness. She wasn't invisible, not tonight, not here, and that was terrifying, because it meant she had to choose, to keep hiding or to let someone see the truth, even if just for a moment, even if she never saw him again. They sat on the damaged bench beneath the flickering light, the silence between them oddly safe. Caleb poured 2 cups from the thermos. Black coffee, still hot. The warmth in her hands contrasted the cold ache in her chest. They didn't speak for several minutes. The sound of distant owls, soft wind, and occasional car far off in the distance filled the void. Isabel glanced at him. "You ever felt like disappearing?" He didn't flinch, just nodded, more than once. That honesty caught her off guard. No sermon, no advice, just presence. She told him pieces of her story. Not all, but enough. The betrayal, the loneliness, the feeling of screaming underwater. He listened like it mattered, not like he was waiting to speak. His eyes stayed steady, his body language still. When she paused, he didn't rush her forward. When she broke, he didn't look away. The rain had stopped, but inside her, something was still falling. Tears she thought were gone began to resurface, and she let them. When the moment passed, he stood and walked to his truck, returning with a small folded blanket. He offered it without a word. She took it and smiled faintly, a smile that hadn't shown itself in weeks. He nodded once more and turned toward his vehicle. Before leaving, he glanced back. "There's a diner about 20 minutes from here. If you're not ready to go home, they serve pancakes all night." And with that, he drove off, his taillights swallowed by fog. Isabel remained seated, holding the coffee, the letters, and 1,000 unsaid things. She didn't know what this night meant, but it meant something. She looked at the letters again. They were heavier now, not with guilt, but with possibility. Her fingers traced the paper edges, torn between letting go and rewriting them completely. She stood slowly and stretched, her body sore from hours of tension. The sky was still gray, but the clouds had shifted. She walked back to the car, closed the door, and started the engine. She didn't turn around. She didn't rush forward. She simply drove somewhere. The diner sign flickered red and blue like a tired lighthouse in the fog. Isabel pulled into the near-empty lot, unsure why she had followed Caleb's suggestion. The parking lot smelled of rain and fried food. She sat for a moment, staring at her own reflection in the rearview mirror. Her eyes were swollen, skin pale, hair clinging to her cheeks. She didn't recognize this version of herself, and yet she was the one who had survived this far. With a long exhale, she tucked the letters into the glove box again and stepped out. The night air tasted of old grease and pine trees. Inside, a bell rang as she opened the door. The place was almost empty. A single waitress behind the counter humming softly to a radio. One trucker with his head down in a corner booth, and a clock on the wall ticking far too loud for such a quiet space. Isabel chose a booth by the window, avoiding her own reflection in the glass. She ordered pancakes and tea, simple, grounding. When the waitress brought her cup, she offered a smile that felt like a fragile thread between two strangers. Isabel smiled back, small but genuine. The warmth of the tea settled in her chest, pushing against the cold thoughts still circling. She took out her phone for the first time in hours. No new messages, but she wasn't surprised. Her thumb hovered over a contact. Mom. She almost tapped it. Almost. Instead, she opened her notes app and began typing. A message she would probably never send. I didn't leave because of you, but I never stayed because of how much it hurt to try. The words appeared slowly, each one draining something out of her, but they were real. She wrote another. To Julia. I miss how we used to laugh when we had no idea what we were doing. Maybe we still don't, but I miss it anyway. And then, a third note. This one for herself. You are still here. That means something. She read it twice, then saved it. For the first time, she didn't delete her own voice. She let it sit there. Digital proof that her pain wasn't imagined. She didn't know who she was becoming, but maybe she was allowed to try again. The waitress returned and placed the pancakes in front of her, warm and imperfect. Isabel stared at the syrup dripping down the edges. Something about it reminded her of childhood, of safe mornings, of things she thought she had lost forever. She picked up the fork and took a bite, and for a moment, she didn't feel like a ghost, just a woman eating pancakes at 2 a.m. Alive, still fragile, but alive. And that was something. As she ate, her eyes wandered to the corner of the booth, where a Bible sat wedged between the salt and pepper shakers, worn, cracked leather. Pages highlighted in different colors. She reached for it slowly, unsure why. It opened to a random page. Her eyes landed on a verse she had underlined years ago. During a retreat she barely remembered. He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. Psalm 147:3. She blinked hard and held the book for longer than she meant to. She left a few bills on the table and walked out, not looking back. The night was clearer now. The fog had lifted. She stood by her car, not to leave, but to breathe. The kind of breath you take when something inside you just cracked open, not fully healed, but no longer frozen. A text notification buzzed. Blocked number. One sentence. I'm glad you stayed. No name, no signature, but she knew who it was. She didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, she opened the glove box and took out the letter addressed to Whoever Finds Me. She unfolded it slowly, read the first lines, and then tore it in half. No one needed to find that version of her anymore, because maybe she was starting to find herself. She watched the pieces flutter to the ground like ash, not with sadness, but release. And then she got in the car and waited for morning. The morning crept in slowly. casting pale light through the windshield. Isabel hadn't slept, just sat there, arms crossed, watching the steam rise from the last cup of coffee she'd brought from the diner. The condensation on the window formed tiny trails like silent teardrops on glass. She traced one with her finger, and for the first time in a long time her hands weren't trembling. There was a stillness in her chest. Not peace, not yet, but a pause from the storm. And in that quiet, she wondered, what would it mean to go back, without being the same girl who left? Her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. This time, she answered. No words came for the first 3 seconds. Then a familiar voice. I just wanted to know if you were okay. It was Caleb. She could hear the static of his old truck in the background. I'm not, she replied, voice calm. But I'm still here. That seemed to be enough for him. You don't owe me anything, he said. But if you ever want to talk again, I drive by that rest stop every weekend. She smiled. It was the first one that didn't feel borrowed. He didn't ask for her story. He simply showed up again. Later that morning, Isabel pulled into a gas station to fill the tank. She stepped into the restroom and caught her reflection again. Same tired eyes, same bruised spirit. But this time, something else hovered in the background. A question, a softness, a dare to live. The mirror was cracked in the corner, like her, but it still reflected truth. She stared for a while, then took out her lipstick, the one she hadn't used in months. She applied it slowly, like a ritual, then whispered, not for them, for me. Her reflection blinked back, stronger than before. Back on the road, she opened the window just a crack. The wind tangled her hair, but she didn't fix it. She let it dance wild, like her spirit trying to stretch again. Her playlist came back to life. Soft piano, no lyrics. She didn't need anyone else's voice right now, only her breath, her heartbeat, and the rhythm of the highway. The rearview mirror no longer haunted her. Now, it reminded her how far she'd come in 24 hours. Sometimes, survival wasn't loud. It was choosing to keep moving forward, inch by inch. As the afternoon sun warmed the dashboard, Isabel thought about the people she'd left behind, about her mom, about Julia, about the parts of her that had shattered in their silence. Maybe one day she'd speak to them again, but not today. Today was about crossing the invisible line between surviving and deciding to live. She took the next turn, not because she had a destination, but because she had a direction, away from the version of herself that nearly disappeared. She stopped by a small roadside chapel, its wooden sign barely readable from the road. Something in her urged her to step inside. The pews were empty. Dust particles floated through shafts of golden light from stained glass windows. It smelled like old books and hope. Isabel sat in the second row and didn't speak. She just listened, not for voices or visions, but for herself, her breathing, her presence, her pulse. That was enough of a miracle for today. Sometimes resurrection begins in silence. Her eyes wandered to the front where a single candle was still lit. How long had it been burning? She knelt beside it, not in prayer, but in acknowledgement of pain, of survival, of the fact that she was still here. And maybe so was God, not in the way she'd imagined, but in this soft return, in this breath, in this sacred quiet, in this choice to stay. As she stepped back outside, the sun hit her face directly. She closed her eyes, soaking in the light. And there, on the other side of the car window, she saw her reflection again. Not behind glass, but beside it. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like two people. One broken, one pretending. She felt whole enough to drive forward. Not to escape, but to arrive. Even if she didn't know where yet, she was ready to find out. The road stretched endlessly, but Isabel no longer feared its silence. The sky had shifted to that soft blue-gray that follows rain, and the trees lining the highway looked greener somehow, like the world had washed itself clean overnight. With the window halfway down, she listened to the rhythm of the tires against the asphalt and the occasional whistle of wind cutting through. She didn't know where she was going, only that she wasn't lost anymore. Her phone, face down on the passenger seat, vibrated twice. This time she didn't hesitate. She picked it up and answered. "Hi," the voice said. It wasn't Caleb. It was Julia. There was a beat of silence, raw, uncertain. I saw your post last night, the one you didn't tag anyone in, but I knew it was you." Isabel gripped the steering wheel tighter. She had forgotten that some things don't disappear just because we drive away. "I've been worried," Julia added. "Then why did you vanish?" Isabel asked, softly. The line went quiet, but not empty. "I didn't know how to be there for you," Julia admitted. "I thought giving you space was what you needed." Isabel exhaled slowly. "Sometimes space feels like abandonment." "I know," Julia whispered. "I'm sorry. It wasn't a fix. It wasn't even enough, but it was something. The kind of something that sounded real, and that was a start. Sometimes bridges don't burn. They just bend, waiting to be rebuilt." They talked for miles, about nothing and everything, about who they used to be and who they didn't want to become. Laughter cracked through the conversation like sunlight through a dense forest, and with it, Isabel felt an old version of herself stir. The girl who believed people came back, not always perfectly, not always when we want, but sometimes they return, not to rescue, but to walk beside us, to sit in our silence, to remind us we're not too far gone. Eventually, they fell quiet again, but this time it wasn't painful, just shared breath. Julia asked, "Where are you going?" "I don't know," Isabel replied, "but it feels different now." "Want company?" Isabel thought for a moment. "No, but maybe soon." And Julia understood. That was enough. She stopped at a lookout point just before sunset. The view opened to a vast valley, touched by golden light and scattered shadows. Isabel leaned against the railing, wind brushing her hair gently. She wasn't thinking about endings anymore. She was thinking about possibility, the in-between, the healing that comes in fragments, not fireworks. She took out her phone again and saved Julia's contact as "still here." She smiled. Sometimes we rename people when we're ready to believe again. Back in the car, she didn't turn the music on. She just drove with the windows down, letting the air remind her she was alive. As the sun dipped below the horizon, her headlights lit the road ahead. The rearview mirror caught her reflection again. But this time, she didn't look away. She whispered, "Thank you." Not to the mirror, not even to the road, but to the one who saw her even when she couldn't see herself. The voice that had never been unknown, just unheard, until now. The sun had fully set by the time Isabel found herself on a winding mountain road. The GPS lost signal miles ago, but she didn't panic. The road felt oddly familiar, as if her heart was guiding her somewhere her mind didn't recognize. A bend in the road revealed a wooden gate, weathered, crooked, and half open. She pulled over, headlights casting long shadows across the trees. A small hand-painted sign read, "Retreat Center closed for season." Something tugged at her chest. She remembered this place. It was where her church youth group came every summer, before everything in her life changed. She parked near the edge of the clearing and stepped out. The air smelled of pine and earth, cool and clean. She followed a narrow dirt path lined with stones, her boots crunching softly beneath her. The night sky stretched wide above her, no city lights to dim it. The stars blinked like quiet witnesses, and then she saw it. The old wooden bench beneath the big sycamore tree. The one she used to sit on when she was 14, crying silently while everyone else sang worship songs. She approached it slowly, like returning to an old friend. The bench creaked as she sat, but held her weight. The wood was worn smooth by years of secrets and quiet prayers. Isabel looked up. The sky above was endless. No roof, No walls, no judgment, just open sky. She remembered sitting here years ago praying for someone to see her, for a sign, for a whisper. Back then, she left believing God was silent, but maybe she had stopped listening, or maybe she had only been listening for answers, not presence. And this time, presence was enough. She closed her eyes and breathed, not to escape, but to arrive. For once, she wasn't searching for the next place. She wasn't thinking about Julia, or her mother, or Caleb. She was just here, rooted in the bench, in the dirt, in the now. She didn't speak, but in the stillness, she felt held, as if the sky had armed, as if the air itself remembered her name. A soft wind picked up, brushing past her like fingers through hair. It wasn't cold, it was comforting, gentle, familiar. She leaned back and whispered to no one, "I didn't come here to be fixed." Her voice cracked. "I just needed somewhere to fall apart safely." The leaves rustled in reply, as if nodding. She took the letters from her coat pocket again, now folded and worn from being touched too often. She looked at them, not with guilt, but with softness. Each one held a version of her that had begged to be heard, but maybe she didn't need to be heard anymore. Just accepted. She stood and walked to the foot of the tree. There, in a hollow by the roots, she buried the letters, not out of shame, but as a release, a burial, not of pain, but of silence. She didn't need someone to find them. She needed to know she had survived them. As the dirt covered the paper, she felt her shoulders drop. For the first time, her past felt lighter, almost sacred. She sat back on the bench, looking at the stars again, and then she started humming. Not a song she knew, just a melody her heart stitched together on the spot. It wavered, it cracked, but it existed, and that was enough, because her voice had returned, not loud, but alive. And somewhere out there, beyond the trees, beyond the pain, she believed someone was listening. The morning dew clung to her shoes as Isabel walked down the gravel path, leaving the bench behind. The sky was clear now, streaked with soft gold and pastel blue. Each step felt more intentional, more alive, like she was pressing her presence back into the earth after years of drifting. Her phone remained off. Her past, buried beneath the sycamore. Her present, blooming with every breath. She didn't know if she was healed, but she knew she was no longer running, and that in itself was holy. The weight she carried wasn't gone, but it no longer crushed her. It had shifted, transformed. She returned to her car, opened the door, and sat without starting the engine. She traced the steering wheel like someone greeting an old friend. She remembered the girl who had gripped it with desperation not 2 days ago. That girl still existed, but now she shared space with another, one who had tasted silence and survived it. Isabel reached for her notebook in the glove box. Instead of writing a goodbye, she wrote a beginning. Today, I buried what almost ended me, and in its place, I found air and light and grace. She drove with the window open, wind weaving through her fingers. Towns blurred by, but this time she noticed the details. A dog chasing kids through a sprinkler, an old man sweeping a dusty porch, a girl on a bicycle laughing alone. Life didn't look dramatic anymore. It looked sacred. She stopped at a farmer's market for a cup of coffee and a fresh piece of bread. The woman at the stall smiled and said, "You look lighter." Isabel blinked, surprised. She smiled back. "I think I am." She sat on a wooden bench near the market, watching people pass. She wasn't part of their stories, but she didn't feel invisible either. She wrote in her journal again, "Sometimes grace doesn't erase pain. It just gives us a softer place to set it down." She thought about Caleb, about Julia, about the voice that had found her in the fog. Each of them had been a piece of grace, and maybe she had been one too, even in her brokenness, especially in it. A child passed by and handed her a flower without a word, a wild daisy torn at the stem, imperfect and beautiful. Isabel held it like something sacred. Innocence was loud in children, but in adults it was quiet, a choice, a remembering. She tucked the flower into her hair, not to be seen, but to honor the softness returning to her. The bench beneath her creaked, and for a moment, she felt like the sky was sitting beside her again. Later, she found a chapel near the edge of town, small, white, with chipped paint, and a wooden cross that leaned ever so slightly. She stepped inside. No one was there, only light and air and dust floating like glitter. She didn't kneel. She didn't cry. She just stood in the center aisle and whispered, "Thank you." And in that silence, she felt it. Not a voice, not a miracle, just a presence. Soft, real. She sat in the last pew, writing one final note in her journal. "I am not the same woman who pulled over in the fog, and thank God for that." She closed the book, not because her story was over, but because the next chapter had to be lived, not written. She took one last look at the altar, then stepped outside. The sun was warm on her face. The world no longer felt like a weight. It felt like an invitation. As she walked back to her car, she passed a mirror hanging near the church entrance. She paused and looked. This time, she saw someone she wanted to know, someone whose eyes still carried pain, but also fire, also faith, also grace. And just before turning away, she whispered to her reflection, "Let's go live." The road home didn't look the same. The buildings, the traffic lights, the cracks in the pavement, all unchanged. But Isabel saw everything differently now. The streets once filled with shadows now shimmered with meaning. Every sign, every intersection whispered of second chances. She slowed near familiar places. The cafe where she used to meet Julia, the bookstore she hadn't entered in over a year, and the corner apartment that never really felt like hers. Her heartbeat was steady, not because she wasn't scared, but because she wasn't avoiding it anymore. Coming back wasn't weakness. It was the boldest thing she'd ever done. She parked in front of her building, staring at the door as if it were a test. The lobby smelled like lemon cleaner and memories. She climbed the stairs slowly, her bag over her shoulder and her heart in her throat. At the top, she paused. Apartment 204. The numbers looked smaller than she remembered. Her key slipped into the lock without resistance. The door creaked open, and the air inside wrapped around her like a question. "Are you really ready to be here again?" She stepped in and said yes. The apartment hadn't changed. The shoes by the door, the coat on the chair, the faint scent of vanilla from an old candle. But she was unrecognizable to this space. She walked through each room like a visitor, touching familiar objects with unfamiliar hands. She opened the window, let in the light, let in the city noise, let in herself. Her journal, still on the nightstand, waited like a silent witness. She picked it up, sat on the edge of the bed and wrote, "Today I walked into my past, but didn't become it." And her hand didn't shake. She took a shower, slow and warm, letting the water trace the places where she had once held tension. Her shoulders, her jaw, her chest. She dressed simply, jeans, a soft white shirt, and no makeup. She looked in the mirror. This time, there were no smudges to erase. Only eyes wide open, eyes that had seen both the edge and the light. She ran her fingers through her hair, tied it back, and whispered, "Let's begin again." And somehow it didn't sound like a wish. It sounded like a promise. She spent the afternoon clearing things out. Not out of anger, but renewal. Old letters, broken mugs, outdated clothes, all gone. Each bag she filled was lighter than the last, not because the contents had changed, but because her grip had. She opened the windows in every room, letting the breeze stir dust and memory alike. Music played in the background, soft, instrumental, like a heartbeat. And in the stillness between songs, Isabel danced. Not for anyone, not even for joy, but for freedom. Near sunset, she walked to the mailbox downstairs. Inside, a letter with no return address. She opened it slowly, fingers tingling. Inside was a single piece of paper, handwritten. You are not forgotten. You were never alone. You are not a mistake. No signature, no explanation, just those words. And in that moment, she wept again, not from sorrow, but from being seen. She sat on the building's front steps, watching the sun tuck itself behind the skyline. Cars passed, children laughed somewhere nearby, and Isabel, once a girl who believed silence was her destiny, now sat with a heart so full it spilled into her smile. She texted Julia, "Come over this weekend, let's rebuild." Then she added Caleb's number to her contacts. "Thank you." Again. And to herself, she said, "You made it. Let's see what tomorrow looks like." As night settled, she didn't close the curtain. She let the stars watch her. Let the world know she wasn't hiding anymore. She poured a cup of tea, sat by the window, and breathed in the quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't echo pain, but peace. And when she closed her eyes, she saw light, not from above, but from within. Because sometimes, coming home isn't about a place. It's about coming back to who you were meant to be. Weeks passed, but the memory of the fog never faded. Isabel didn't try to erase it anymore. She carried it with her, not as shame, but as a monument, a place her soul had visited and returned from. Her days were slow now, sacred. She started journaling every morning, walking barefoot on her balcony, and watering plants she once forgot to care for. She wasn't chasing answers. She was letting truth arrive quietly. Some days still hurt. Others felt weightless. But all of them were hers. And after everything, that was more than enough. She met Julia for coffee. They sat at the same cafe where so many things had begun and unraveled. This time the words flowed gently. No blame. No lists of what went wrong. Just honesty, laughter, and the brave silence between sentences. Julia took Isabel's hand at one point and said, "You're still you." And Isabel replied, "Yes, but I finally believe that's a good thing." The wound between them hadn't fully closed, but it wasn't bleeding anymore. And even scars can be beautiful when you stop hiding them. She kept Caleb's number in her phone but never overused it. Sometimes they texted, other times they didn't. But when she passed the rest stop again one evening, she smiled, not with pain, with gratitude. She had survived something unspeakable, and someone had knocked on the window. That mattered. He mattered, but not as a savior. As a reminder that even in the middle of nowhere, God sends presents before solutions, and sometimes that's the miracle. Isabel began volunteering at a shelter for young women, not to preach, not to rescue, but to sit, to listen, to hand out warm drinks and hold heavy stories. She never told her full story, only enough to let them know she understood. She didn't wear her past like a badge, but when she said, "I know what it's like to feel invisible," they believed her. Because healing doesn't sound like perfection. It sounds like, "I'm still here." One night she was asked to share something at a small community group. She stood with her journal, palms sweating, heart racing, but voice steady. "There was a moment," she began, "when I thought the silence would be the last thing I heard." Eyes met hers across the room. But I learned that silence doesn't mean absence. Sometimes, it's God's way of sitting beside us while we find our breath again. She paused, holding the tension. "I don't have all the answers, but I know this. If you're still here, it's not over." And the room, full of people, felt like one heartbeat. Later that night, she opened her Bible to the verse she had found in the diner, Psalm 147:3. She underlined it again, but this time added a date, the day she returned home, the day she forgave herself. She folded the corner of the page and smiled softly. He heals the broken-hearted. She didn't know when it began. The healing, the shift. Maybe it started on the road, maybe at the diner, or maybe when she finally let herself be found. She lit a candle in her apartment every night, not for ritual, but remembrance of who she was, who she had become, and who she was still becoming. She started writing letters again, this time to strangers. She'd leave them in cafes, on park benches, inside library books. Each one said something like, "If you're holding this, you matter. Don't give up yet." She never signed them. She didn't need credit. She had been saved by an unsigned voice once, too. And on a quiet Sunday morning, with sunlight pouring through the curtains, Isabel whispered something she never thought she'd say again. "Thank you for not letting me disappear." And somewhere in her heart, a response came. Not loud, not dramatic, but steady, present, real. "You were never going to?" She smiled. She had walked through the fog, sat with silence, felt the weight of life, and still she survived to tell what she saw,